Quite a few people have asked if I could take a look at this, so that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. It's a Panasonic RX-D55 boombox. It's quite an older model. It first came out 10 years ago, and it almost feels like they're kind of discontinuing it a little bit. I'll explain more on that in a moment. But the features of this, well, we've got a radio, a cassette, a CD player. It'll play CD MP3s, and it'll also play MP3s via a USB slot. But that's not my focus. I'm interested in the cassette part of this, because with this being an older design, perhaps it's still being made to a reasonable standard as to what people would have made something like this 10 years ago. The reason I mention that, I've reviewed a lot of modern day boombox type devices, and they've all been pretty shocking as far as the cassette part of it goes. The Philips one I looked at about a month ago, radio was good, but it really neglected the cassette part of the thing, and that's what I was interested in. So hopefully this one is much better than that when it comes to playing back the cassette. But yeah, because it's an older device, you're not getting like Bluetooth, you're not getting DAB radio, that kind of stuff. Now, I mentioned that I thought it was kind of being discontinued. The reason for that is it doesn't show on the UK Panasonic website anymore. It doesn't show on the US Panasonic website either. Those are two quite big markets, you would have thought. So they've kind of withdrawn it from those, because they did sell it in those places at one point. Mine came from Germany. They still sell it in Germany. It cost me €143. I bought it from Amazon in Germany. I've seen it on the Amazon Spain website and the Amazon France one as well. So there are places around the world. You'll also see it on the US Amazon website, but just read down and you'll notice the people have bought one. They've said it's a European version, 240 volts, that's being sold with a step-up power transformer. So it's not officially being sold by Panasonic in the US either. But yeah, that's enough about that. Let's zoom in on the box a little bit, have a look at a couple of features on here, then we'll get it out and we'll be able to test whether or not this is like the last decent cassette boombox. My hope for this is that it's a little bit like a kind of Mexican Volkswagen Beetle or an Indian Enfield Bullet, you know, something that was kind of designed quite a while before, but kept being manufactured in its original state longer than people expected it to. That's my hope. I'm hoping I've effectively bought a 2010 boombox in 2020. Let's find out. Right, well, first impressions are good. Just from the box, I'll explain what I mean. First off, it weighs a reasonable amount. Some of these more modern ones I've tested, it feels like the box has been empty. And second, I kind of trust Panasonic more than I trust some of these no-name manufacturers. For example, they're saying they've got two-way speakers, 10 watts by 2. I suspect that will be right. I wouldn't trust that information on some of these more modern ones. They just put any old numbers on there to keep you happy, and they'll put fake tweeters in them and all that kind of stuff. Next, the remote control. I can see that the remote that's included in here is a good chunky one. It looks identical to one I got with a Blu-ray or a DVD player many years ago. So, you know, it's not like they've packed in one of those little kind of bubble button things with a coin battery in the bottom of it. And the next thing I wanted to mention here, portable stereo CD system. They're not mentioning the cassette at all. Again, just like that Philips one the other week, they're keeping the cassette on the down low. Now, I've just got to mention these torn off bits. That was me. I did that. I was taking off labels. They just put my address label over the top of some of the stuff I wanted to show you. It just came in this box. It wasn't packed inside another one. Now, notice here, English again, portable stereo CD system. But we move down to French. We get radio, cassette, stereo with CD player. So it depends on what country you're in, whether or not they consider the cassette part of this of any relevance. It'll run off 8 alkaline LR14 batteries. LR14s are what I would generally call C cells. Now this gives me a bit of hope, the fact it's made in Indonesia. I've got no idea whether Indonesia are good at making things like this, but just the fact it doesn't say made in China gives me hope that it's going to be different from the rest of the stuff. Okay, so first off, that's the remote. Yeah, nice. Right, put it to one side. Pan-European guarantee. That's my English operating instructions, but yeah, there's plenty of different languages in there. Is it an IEC C7 or a C8? I can never remember which way around they are, but that's the usual kind of figure of 8 plug and a European plug on that end. I've got plenty of alternatives that I could use instead of that. Or I could just plug that into a travel adapter, but I don't need to. Right, well, let's try and get this out of here. I've got to say, the fact it's got polystyrene around it kind of harkens back to an earlier age, because nowadays everything's eco-packaged. You tend to get cardboard around things. So yeah, it's not great for the environment, but it also indicates the fact that this is kind of an older product built to older standards. And there we go. Now that is more silver than I expected it to be. It was listed as black on the box. Not a problem, not a complaint, but that definitely looks silver rather than black. Now the cassette mech is hidden in the top here. Well, that isn't that well hidden, that's just the cassette door. The actual buttons for it though, they're in this section here. Just pop down like that. Now they're mechanical buttons, which will mean it's probably going to be using a kind of tenashing type mechanism. Let's open it up and have a look. So you can see the little spring there with the loop in it. It looks a little bit different to some tenashing mechs that I've seen. But Sony also have a cheap mech in theirs, which is different again. They're all quite samey with plastic everywhere, and I think this is going to be using a permanent magnet erase head. It's really difficult to see this, but that is the erase head there that comes into contact with the tape. And if I put a pin near it, yeah, it's getting attracted to it even with the power off. So yeah, permanent erase head. Okay, so here's the remote control. You can see it's got a lot of buttons on it. I'm sure there are more buttons on here than there are on the machine itself. So there's some features such as the timer, all that kind of stuff that you'll need the remote for. So you don't want to lose this. But this will not operate the cassette deck because the buttons on the cassette are manually controlled rather than soft touch controls. You'll still be able to operate the volume, but if you want to rewind, fast forward, stop, play, record, you're going to have to get up and operate the buttons on the top of the machine. It was a case of batteries not included, so you'll need to provide your own, but that's no big hardship. Yeah, so these controls are quite clunky. So it's not like a high quality cassette deck, but it also depends on what the circuitry is behind it and how good the head is. I've got some old 80s boomboxes that have mechanisms much the same as this. It's just they sound a lot better than the current ones because the rest of this stuff that goes behind them is of a better quality than what they tend to put on a cassette deck nowadays. It turns out from reading this panel on the back that it uses more batteries than I thought. We've got 8 C cells that power it with 12 volts, but we've also got 4 AA's which are used for the backup memory. That will remember things like the radio presets. Now, if you're just planning on powering it from the mains power supply, you won't need these. But I definitely think you want to put those in there unless you want it to forget everything every time you switch it off. You can see the diagram for the batteries above the compartment here. I'm going to put all the batteries into mine. So we'll start off with the AA's. They just go in the bottom here. And then the C cells go on the top. Not the nicest battery compartment. I know it's only something silly that it doesn't really matter, but it just feels a little bit cheap down there. But now that everything's in, hopefully that's going to get it working. I've just had a look in the manual here at the battery life, and it's a little bit of a shock given the fact I've just put 8 C-cell alkaline batteries in there. On my model, which is the RX-D55, it'll just run for 3.2 hours before those batteries are flat. Definitely not being optimised for power efficiency, this one. You can tell it's an older type of device. As far as playing a CD goes, you get 2.4 hours. So you get a couple of CDs or so out of this, and tape playback 2.5 hours. Notice here the RX-D50, that has a longer battery life for all these things because it's got less power output on it. It doesn't go as loud. So maybe they've just measured these at maximum volume. Maybe they'll go a little bit longer than that. Yeah, looking around the front here, there aren't that many controls. So yeah, quite a lot of them are on the remote. Things like the bass, the treble, all that kind of stuff. So it's really just got the basics here. Music port is a 3.5mm auxiliary input. The USB, that's USB 2.0. It just plays MP3s through there, nothing else. And then you can select your source here, buttons for the CD player, track skip, that kind of thing. Notice the USB has its own play and pause button over here, which is unusual. And then we've got a sound EQ, and finally CD open and close. So let's just open it. It's uncommon to see a tray loading mechanism on a boombox. They tend to put the CD player only on the top, but of course that's where the cassette deck is on this one. Notice there's cutouts in the tray here so you can play your 8cm or your 12cm discs. Okay, the first thing I want to check is whether or not the cassette deck is outputting stereo. It should be doing, but let's just double check.
Right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left.
Well, that's good news. I shouldn't have expected anything less, but good to know that we've got a stereo head and amplification circuitry for the cassette mech. In addition to that, though, I noticed the mechanism itself is a little bit more sophisticated than I first thought. It's not purely mechanical. It's not just a matter of me pushing the button down, brings the head straight into line with the tape. There's a slight delay when the mechanism itself brings the head up afterwards. I'll see if I can show you by zooming in a little bit. I don't know how well this is going to come across on camera, but just look for the ever so slight delay after I've pressed play before the head moves up. Now you can see from looking at the top of the cassette compartment there's only the one switch on the left to determine whether or not the record tab has been removed. So there's no provision in here for checking whether or not it's a metal or a chrome tape, and of course there's no noise reduction on this. Dolby don't license their noise reduction system anymore for cassettes. I'm going to put a cassette in here. This is a Type 2, but that's what I've got my audio library music recorded on. It should sound fine, so let's have a listen. Now I've noticed it's not particularly well shielded when it comes to modern day interference. So for example, I've got my Wi-Fi router very close to this, and as the audio fades out on this section, you'll hear a very quick pitter-patter type of sound. That's not coming from the tape deck itself, that's just the interference it's picking up over the speakers. If I move it somewhere else, I don't hear it. But anyway, just have a listen. One thing I've noticed is that by having the cassette deck the same mode as the whole thing being off, every time you press a control, the thing just has to power up the amp for a second before it plays anything. So you get this delay. I'll show you what I mean. I'll press play now. Which is fine, but if you fast forward, say, just to a different part of the song, and then you press play again, you get the same delay. So you're not quite sure whether you've fast forwarded to a silent part of the tape. You just have to wait a couple of seconds. It's slightly annoying, but not too much of a deal breaker. At least pause keeps it going. Now it's unfortunate that I can only play tapes in the video that are things that I've got from sources where I'm not going to get into trouble, like the YouTube music library. But trust me, these aren't the only tapes I'll be playing. These are the tapes I can play in the video, but I've got a wall of tapes over here, some that I'm very familiar with, so I'm going to be testing out some of those in here. For example, just reached over now, got Eric B. and Rakim, Follow the Leader, so I'm going to put that in there and have a good listen, but I won't be able to play you that one, unfortunately. There are a few ways you can affect the sound, some of which are only available from the remote control. We've got the traditional bass and treble, but we've also got a sound virtualizer. You can see it on the screen at the top left when I switch it on. It puts that little graphic on there. That's just to show it's got a wider sound stage with it selected, and it actually sounds better with it on. Making quite a feature of it here with the writing as well. And then also we've got the sound EQ, which cycles between a variety of equalizations. We've got heavy, clear, soft and vocal. I was listening to it with heavy on before and the virtualizer, and that was the kind of sound that I prefer as far as this kind of music goes. If I was playing some other kind of music, I might switch it to a different mode on the EQ or turn it off. Okay, I'm going to stick this CD in that Candy Apple Blues sent me. The reason I'm going to use this is because they've got CD text on here, so we'll be able to see if it supports that. Yeah, there's no CD text info showing on this one, which is not a surprise. One of the benefits to having it plugged into your mains power supply is that even after you've switched it off, the clock will remain on. You'll see that if I pull the power, everything goes off. Okay, I've just put the specs on the screen here. A couple of things I want to mention. Skipping down the left hand side past the amplifier and the tuner just into the disc section, notice there on MP3s it will play them up to 320 kilobits a second. And then if we go to the bottom of there, WoW and Flutter, well, it says less than possible measurable data. I don't know why you didn't put that in the disc section. The place where you want your WoW and Flutter measurement is in your cassette section, which is at the top right, and they don't mention it there at all, which gives me the impression it's not going to be great. But a couple of things from that section. Notice the array system, it says multi-pole magnet, basically a permanent magnet as we saw earlier. But the frequency response, this is the good thing, 50 Hz to 12 kilohertz. Now, it doesn't really sound all that exciting on its own, but compare it to the Philips boombox that I reviewed about a month ago, which wasn't really Philips, it was someone in Hong Kong, but regardless. The frequency response on that was 125 Hz up to 8 kilohertz. So you can see how this one has a much wider frequency range, and that's why this one sounds a heck of a lot better on the cassette section, because it is a heck of a lot better on the cassette section. Now, if we skip down into the USB there, you can see that it only takes FAT16, FAT32, that kind of thing. The USB port power, 500 milliamps, well, bear in mind that that switches off when the USB is turned off. And I'll mention why that's important in a second. But down to the speaker section, we've got a full range and a ceramic tweeter. They're both listed there. They won't just make that up, I don't think. I'm not going to tear it apart to double check, but I do trust them given the rest of the specs. So there you go. That's a quick look at the specs. Now, the reason I mentioned that the USB port has its power disconnected from it when it's not in use is because I was thinking that might be a few people out there that might be contemplating the idea of adding Bluetooth to this by plugging a Bluetooth receiver into the auxiliary input and powering that device from the USB port. But of course, once you switch to the music port, the power goes off to the device and it wouldn't work. So you'd have to find a different way to power your Bluetooth receiver. And one more thing to say about this music port, the only way you can activate it, the only way you can switch to it, isn't with any buttons on the front of the device. It's with this one in the middle of the remote. So if you're going anywhere and you want to listen to whatever you've plugged into your music port, make sure you take your remote control along with you. Now, whilst you can play your MP3 files from a USB stick, I can't imagine many people buying this device just to do that. Most people would have a better way of playing their MP3s back than this. But yeah, it works. It shows your track titles. You can jump to different folders. You can random play, but the overall experience is quite rudimentary. The navigation, jumping between things, is quite difficult at times to know exactly where you are on your USB stick. And if you jump around too much, I've found that the whole thing kind of gets stuck in a bit of a loop and doesn't want to play anything at all until you've switched it off and back on again. So yeah, it works, but I don't think I'd ever be using this feature. Now, if you've got CDs that are full of MP3s that perhaps you burnt for your car back in the day, if they're still readable, well, it's quite happy to play those and it'll work just the same as playing them off a USB stick. Now, if you really want to play your MP3s through it and you've got an MP3 player, your best way would be to just plug it into this and use it as external speakers. There's one thing though, with this particular device I've got here, it only has a headphone output and it doesn't really go very loud, so just have a listen to this. So that's at 120, that's the maximum volume on this, and it's still a little bit lacking. But you can adjust the input level at the bottom right here, so if we switch it into high rather than low, so it's good to know that if your device just has a headphone output, not a line level output or not a configurable output that can be set to line level, then at least at the other end on this device you can adjust this to compensate. Now, one thing I suppose I should try is recording on a cassette. The only thing I'll mention about this is though that it is a very bare bones cassette mech. So we're talking about the fact it has a permanent erase magnet, which isn't the ideal way to erase a tape. It can only record onto type 1, doesn't have any kind of noise reduction, there's no tape counter. It's an automatic level control for the recording. But with all that said, I've got behind me a 1980s boombox, and all those things still apply to that. So it's not unusual in that regard. It's very kind of boomboxy. But yeah, boomboxes were never really, well, most of them weren't the best way to record your tapes. You'd be better off recording them on a home deck. But since we're here, we might as well do it. And I'll mention that you can record off any of the other components onto the cassette. So USB stick, auxiliary input, CD, FM, AM. But you can't record onto anything other than cassette. Some people ask, oh, can you record onto the USB stick? No, not on this one, just the cassette. That's the only recording mechanism. Everything else is a player. So let's play this CD in here. I'll just fast forward a little bit, put a pause, record and play on here, and I'm going to take... Now, what's going on? It seems to have automatically started my CD as a kind of auto record setup. That's weird. Didn't ask for it to do that. And we're still in pause, so it's not much use at all. Okay, let's take that back to the beginning. I seem to be locked out of my own USB playback. What's going on? Try the remote. I mean, this might be what I was talking about earlier on when I said the USB is a little bit flaky. It kind of seems to have a life of its own. But yeah, I can't do anything other than play or pause this track now. I can't skip to the next one or back to the beginning of it. All very weird. Let's stop. Take the resume off. Right, so hopefully now this will work. Let's take the pause off here. It's a different track, unfortunately, but it'll do. But yeah, USB functionality on here is problematic. Let's just put it that way. I'm just going to pause the tape there because let's try putting some other sources in on this. So we'll put FM radio in here. If I can get this USB to stop, I'm going to have to pull it out and that'll stop it. Right, let's move across to the radio. Oh no, nothing seems to be active once you've got the record started. Everything is locked out. That's unusual. So if I stop the recorder now and press FM, there we go, changes to it now. Probably not a good idea to play that on YouTube, we'll get a content match. So let's play this CD and we'll skip a few tracks in once I get it going. Right, let's play that one. Now, let's just pause the CD and see if it automatically starts when I press record on here, even though I've got the pause on. No, I think we're all right this time. Take the pause off. Press play on the CD. All very odd. Okay, I think that's enough recording to demonstrate the fact it records. So let's rewind, let's press play and have a listen. Well, based on that performance, I cannot recommend this as a tape recorder. It makes really quite noisy, nasty sounding recordings. Of course, these are not good tapes, but they're Type 1s. They're the only Type 1s I have in the house. I don't tend to record on Type 1, I only record on Type 2, Chrome. But this thing can only record onto Type 1, so that's why I've used these. You might get slightly better performance with slightly better tapes, but I don't think you're ever going to achieve great results. So I would suggest that if you do want a device like this, and you still want to make tape recordings, which most people just want something like this to play their old ones, but if you do still want to make recordings, make your recordings on a different device and play them back on this. It's fine as a player, but not as a recorder. Now, I should mention the radio. There are 16 presets available in FM and 16 in AM. You can jump between the presets with these buttons here, and if you press the tune mode, that cycles between jumping between presets or using these as a manual tuning up and down. However, if you want to save your presets, well, you're going back to your remote control again, so it's another feature that's only available from the remote. I will say, though, the radio, it's not the best at picking up weak signals. In fact, it's really not the best at picking up any signals. It seems to bring a lot of crackle through in this particular room that I'm in. It's not a great room for receiving radio, but it's a good way to demonstrate it because I've got it tuned in here. I'm going to turn it on and just have a listen.
You remember the first time you met her?
I do, yeah. So, you know, growing up, I was used to...
Okay, now that's a fringe reception of 88.9. A lot of crackles on there. Now I'm going to bring in the Sony boombox I bought a couple of years ago. I'll just put it in the same position.
Having a child young just gave me more motivation to make something of myself. And But yeah, I think I was more career driven due to him, and putting that status on Twitter has loads of young mans have come back to me in a similar position that are now midwives themselves or other health professionals, and I've really used that experience to make it a positive.
Okay, I've got the Wow and Flutter meter out here to test the performance of the cassette deck, and I'll just plug the input that goes into the front of here into the headphone output on the back of the Panasonic. Put in my test tape and we'll see what scores we get. Mixed results here, I'd say. On the left, the drift, that's the speed variation. On the right, that's the flutter, the kind of wobbliness. So we'll start with the drift. And we've got both of these scales, by the way, set to 1% at the top. So the needle on the drift is getting almost at 1% there, which means it's running about 1% fast, I think. Let's put 3% at the top and see where it settles down to. Yeah, back down to 1%. So it's running about 1% fast. Now, with some of these devices, you can open them up and adjust the speed by turning a screw on the motor. But often you'll find over the course of a cassette being played, that speed will change again. So it's not really worth adjusting it from 1%, I'd suggest. On the right here, the flutter, well, that's pretty low. Let's put it to 0.3% at the top. So now you're looking at the bottom scale, so 0.3, 0.2, 0.1. It's hovering around 0.1% wow and flutter. Now, if I put it to 0.1, it'll probably peg it on the right. There we go, yeah. So round about 0.1, just over. Oops, a bit of a wobble there. Don't know what that was. But yeah, it seems all right, that. So, you know, I can't complain. It sounds fine. And looking at the specs, other than the odd blip here and there, there's nothing wrong with it either. Okay, so this is going to be the summing up section of the video, but there's a little bit more to say in here than that. So it does go on for quite a bit. If you're bored, I'd just bail now. But for anyone that wants to hang around, a couple of things to mention. I've reviewed quite a few of these modern day boom boxes over the years, and in the comments to each of those videos, you see the same thing coming up over and over again. And I thought it'd be a good idea just to kind of address those things now in the video so that they don't have to be asked over and over again in the comments, because as soon as they sort of scroll off the screen, you know, someone will ask the same thing again. So, I mean, the first thing is, well, I suppose it's not really a question. It's something that always gets said. It's, we used to call them ghetto blasters. You'll see it over and over again. We used to call them ghetto blasters. And yeah, you did. Perhaps it depends on where you were in the world. There were a lot of other names for them, no doubt, depending upon particular towns, cities, countries, whatever, languages. But yeah, generally now they're referred to as boom boxes. I mean, you used to call cars horseless carriages. You don't hear that so much anymore. So, you know, language evolves over time. So let's just stick to the boombox thing. Other than that, you could try and call it a portable CD radio cassette stereo that also has MP3 capability and built-in speakers and could be run off batteries. You see how it gets a little bit long. If you say to someone, I've got a boombox, most people can kind of picture in their heads what you're talking about. So we'll stick with the boombox thing. Last video I did, the number one comment under that was about the play button pointing the wrong way. Fortunately, we don't have that issue on this one. So I answered it a few times, but people kept asking it. In fact, this 80s machine I've got here has the play button pointing the wrong way. It points that way. And all that's about is that the play button points the same direction that the tape's going to go. So if the tape goes in with the, you know, the cassette goes in with the tape at the top, it'll move from this spool to that one, and therefore the arrow points that way. If the tape goes in the other way up with the tape at the bottom, the play arrow will point that way. It's just a kind of standard thing they've done for years, but I suppose people have just kind of forgotten about it or something, or maybe people just haven't really seen some of the cassette boom boxes, which I can understand because, you know, there aren't that many of them out there. I wrote a little list of other things here. Oh yeah, tapes are rubbish is like a common one. And it's like, well, okay, don't buy any then. No problem. The thing is, I've got all these behind me here. Well, I should have gone that way, shouldn't I? I've got all the tapes already. So it doesn't matter whether they're good, bad, indifferent. If I want to play them, I'm going to play them. And I need a tape player to play them on a cassette player. And then you get the people saying, no one wants to play tapes anymore. Well, I wouldn't say no one. I mean, don't project things onto other people. You might not want to do it yourself. I don't want to learn to play the violin. But I'm not going to say nobody wants to play the violin anymore. It's just me, personally. You know, just everyone's got their own little thing. Anyway, and the last one I want to mention off this list is people say, buy an old one. They're better. Now, it's a bit of a broad statement because, yeah, you can get a good old boombox. You can also get a rubbish old boombox. Now, the problem with it is most of them weren't designed to be working for 40 years or so. So by now, they're pretty knackered, a lot of them. They'll need a lot of care and attention. I mean, this one, if you saw the video I did about this, it was a heck of a job to get this working again, and I managed to do it, and I was very happy that I did. But I wouldn't recommend anyone else just go and buy one and then go through that process. Most people could not be bothered. The reason I review these new ones is just to see if there is a decent new one out there. There are loads of decent old ones. I've got some myself. In fact, I'll show you a picture now. That's just one of them. I'll show them in a future video. But that's really more of a kind of collector's thing. Somebody that's really enthusiastic about it. Someone that's prepared to put in the effort to get these things working or maintain them. For your average person who just wants to play some old tapes, it'd be better off if they could get a new one just from a shop now with a bit of a guarantee that works straight off. It's the same as saying someone was going out to buy a new Mini Clubman. They're not the same person who's in the market for a 1973 Mini Clubman. You know, different things. But yeah, moving down my list here, I've got to say that as far as this device goes, I think this is possibly, well, I'd say more than possibly, probably the best boombox you could get nowadays that can play cassettes. There are a lot of others that can't play cassettes, but when you narrow it down to the cassette ones, it's probably the best of them. It isn't without its quirks, though. And the cassette part of it isn't even all that good. In fact, I've got this Sony one behind me here. This has, in a way, a better cassette part because, oops, loud, it had touch controls on. Thanks, Phil. It has touch controls on here. So I can operate the cassette just with a tap, and it can skip to the next track as well. It has a tape counter on it. So yeah, superior in those regards over this one. But the thing is, with this, it just doesn't sound as good. It's not as rich, it's not as kind of wide sounding, not really as clear. This is all right. And when I got it from Japan, I thought, well, it's about the best I've seen so far. But by the time you import one from Japan, it costs a fortune, and it really is just a budget machine over in Japan. You shouldn't be paying top end for a budget machine. So yeah, I never really recommended that people go and get one of these. I just said it was perhaps the best one I'd tested at the time. That said, I had a look at it today. It won't even play CDs anymore. The CD part of it's dead. So, you know, you kind of get the idea of the quality there. It's not a quality device, but it definitely does not sound as... I think it's just a matter of, if I press one of these presets here, the radio comes on. Oh, there's another thing I don't like. This kind of pop-up thing. I'm always just touching that and it pops up. So yeah, it's not good. It's cheaply made and it doesn't sound as good as this. Now, the cassette mech on here, very basic. We've got no track skip. It's not touch controls. There's no tape counter, no noise reduction, no, nothing. But you put a tape in here and it sounds good. I enjoy listening to them on this. Previously in here, I've been listening to the tapes on this triple deck. And even though this is like a retro device and people say, oh, the old ones are better. No, this sounds better than this. I mean, it's no wonder, is it? I mean, look at the size of the speakers on that and that. These are just one way, those are two way. But it just shows that, yeah, they were capable of making a decent cassette portable back in 2010, and they still make it today. Perhaps, maybe it's just old stock they're selling off now. But yeah, let me carry on down my list here. Oh yeah, negatives. Eats batteries like nobody's business. I mean, if you're going to get one of these, it's worth getting a lot of rechargeables for it. And I had a look, I priced it up, rechargeables and a charger. It'd be about £50 or something. So it's not cheap doing it. You know, 8 C-cell rechargeables and a charger. So yeah, bear that in mind. I think it might be a better idea to go for the cheaper one. This is the 55. And there's the 50, which is the one below that, which has less power output, a longer battery life on that as a result. It doesn't have a USB port on the cheaper one, but that's about all. It will still play MP3s off a CD. Maybe that's the one to go for. It has, it's much quieter, like lower output, I think 2 times 3 watts. This is like 2 times 10 watt. But you're not really going to crank this all the way up to the top very often. If you're just going to put one on a table like I've got it here and listen to it, 2 times 3 watts, I'm sure will be more than satisfactory. So yeah, maybe consider the 50. I'll put links to both in the video description. It's your choice. And yeah, to finish off there, it is what I hoped it would be. It's like I mentioned, the kind of Mexican Volkswagen Beetle type of thing. It's an old device that's still being manufactured and still being sold. So it adheres to some qualities that were still just about around in 2010 that your modern day boombox type device just doesn't live up to. The sound quality on this, I really like it. It's very nice. The radio is rubbish as far as reception goes for me in here. That's something to point out. Again, CD player, plays CDs fine. Again, go for those retro boomboxes. A lot of them won't have a CD player on, or if they do, perhaps the laser's dead, so that's something to consider. But yeah, don't use it for recording. Terrible at recording. The MP3 side, as far as the USB goes, problematic in operation. Overall, the operation of it is a little bit unusual. You're turning it off to turn the cassette deck on, that kind of thing. It does have quite a few quirks, but when it comes down to it, if you put a cassette in this and press play, it's the best way to listen to a cassette on a modern day portable boombox, as far as I can tell. I don't know if there's one better than this. If there is, let me know in the comments. But yeah, as far as a boombox that can play cassettes, I think this is as good as it gets nowadays. Anyway, that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.